Episode 6 is a little bit more challenging because it's actually told through other characters' perspective. Besides the three core elements that we're always trying to balance, which are comedy, mystery, and
Mhm.
character, we also had to infuse it with the style and perspective of some characters that we don't know that well and that we have some suspicions about. And that just adds a whole new challenge to putting the show together. Season 4, I think, is bigger, more challenging, but I think it paid off.
Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, of course, on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week, I'm joined by editor Matthew Barbato, whose work includes Lessons in Chemistry, Veep, and more recently, Only Murders in the Building. Welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you? Nice to be here.
Pretty good, thanks. Now, you're returning to Only Murders in the Building for this latest season.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, because you worked on the first season and then you had to jump to the third season, what were some of how did things change from the workflow and from an editing perspective for you?
In the first season, we were really trying to figure out the tone of the show, and as everyone knows at this point, it's a tricky balance of comedy, mystery, and character.
Mhm.
But when we were first starting, we were just trying to figure out how that was all going to work together because it seemed like an almost impossible task to have a show that carried all of those things and didn't get in the way of each other. And I think as in any first season of any show, there's sort of a little bit more that goes into it, trying to figure out, how things are going to go and the cast that get comfortable and things like that. So there were a few hiccups in the first season, but they were all fairly standard things that you encounter when you're trying to put a show together.
I sort of got into VFX by accident. I always had a technical interest in photography and especially as it relates to movie making. There's something magical about the ability to believe something is happening when it isn't. So I went as a live action producer into a company called Bob Abel and Associates. Then I would have to, have a meeting about how do we do this effect that's in this commercial, and I never got the straight answer I was looking for. I have camera knowledge, so it's like, since it's kind of ambiguous, why don't I just grab a camera and we'll try it out. You have to figure out what tells the story and use every trick in the book to solve your problem. I am Rob Legato, and this is my course on visual effects.
So returning for season 4, I was kind of wondering, like, well, where is it going? How far can they push things? And I know that the showrunner John Hoffman's very ambitious, and he's created this world that really works, and these elements that really fit together. And thanks to him and the writers and the cast, they pulled it off.
Mhm.
So, I don't know. I've told this before, but John Hoffman does a big elaborate Zoom meeting where he explains and he goes through in a very sort of dramatic way the whole arc of the season, so that everyone in all the departments are on board. And I watched that and I was like, oh no, here I knew we might go farther, but we really are going farther. And there were some things in there that I thought, I don't know how we're going to do it. I don't know how we're going to pull it off, but I'm sure we will, because that's what we do. And particularly, episode 6, which I ended up getting to edit and was very happy to do so. That one stuck out to me as a real kind of a challenge, I thought, and a really ambitious swing. They had done something similar in season 1 with the boy from apartment 2B. I think it's 2B.
Mhm.
And that turned out to be an amazing episode and sort of its own kind of genre. This one, I think, is a little bit, episode 6 is a little bit more challenging because it's actually told through other characters' perspective. And so besides the three, core elements that we're always trying to balance, which are comedy, mystery, and
Mhm.
character, we also had to infuse it with the style and perspective of some characters that we don't know that well and that we just have some suspicions about. And that just kind of adds a whole new challenge to putting the show together. But Yeah, season 4, I think is bigger and more challenging, but I think it paid off.
Well, it's interesting because you bring up episode 6, and it's basically a found footage documentary. Um, and so there's certain things that I find interesting about it because, like a found footage, traditionally it's like we found the footage, here's what it is. But I'm wondering because what I noticed is like, and I don't know if maybe it's because we switched to the handheld camera or what have you, but it like I don't want to say you have close-ups in it, but it doesn't feel like it's forced, I guess you could say. Like it doesn't feel like, okay, this is our close-up trick. But I'm wondering like what were some of that, with something like that, like trying to make it feel real, what were some of the things in post that you had to tackle?
Yeah, well, a big part of the success of it comes down to our director, Jessica Yu, did a great job, and our DP, Kyle, I can never pronounce his last name. They both did a lot of planning on the episode and consider the things you're talking about. Like how do you deliver the moments and the emotion and the character beats that you need in a different uh, camera coverage. And that was, the challenge also for me, because typically as an editor, we have different coverages, we have
Hmm.
close-ups, when we can go in, but with this, it was a different story. So part of the success of that is that they just designed it very well. And then once I got that footage, there was a lot that I could kind of do sort of invisible edits and things like that to make sure that we had the best performance and the best coverage. My hope and what I set out to do when I first received the footage and started to see what they were doing was I wanted to keep it looking as raw and as found as possible. I wanted to look like there was very little intervention on our part, and it was just
Hmm.
happening in front of the camera. But in fact, there's not a scene in the episode that doesn't have edits in it, invisible edits.
Yeah.
Even there are static shots. The camera's just watching one thing for the whole thing, and there may be 6 or 8 edits in that just for pacing issues. Um,
Hmm.
and we just look for opportunities to take what we have and make it still feel simple and easy and like they just went out and shot the whole thing in one take, but actually kind of make sure that we were using the best stuff in
Yeah.
each part. There was conversations early on about like, well, it's a found footage documentary. We can do jump cuts. We can do whatever we want. It doesn't matter. And we thought about that, but early on, I wanted it to feel like we weren't manipulating and that we weren't cheating. I did want to cheat, but I just wanted it not to be seen. Um,
Yeah.
s- I stayed away from that, and I think there are only 2 instances of jump cuts in there that I used for very specific reasons. And I thought, well, maybe that's the exception that proves the rule. Maybe by seeing a jump cut,
Hmm.
it'll it'll look like we weren't trying too hard to maintain a certain look to it. That's my
You
rationale.
you mentioned sort of, doing hidden cuts to adjust the pacing. And one of the things I've been very interested in is like you've worked on a lot of well-known comedies, and in this you have two like comedy legends, but their pacing and delivery is very different. And then they're juxtaposed with someone who's, a singer who's moved into acting, who has a very sort of dry pacing and delivery for her character. And I'm wondering how that affects pacing and what have you when you're cutting, because, I think about Martin Short and he's sort of lively and excited and like over the top almost. And juxtaposing that with someone who's very reserved, like, and pulled back can have like I don't want to say a negative impact, but like a weird effect on the pacing.
Yeah, I think in this case, it's the contrast is what helps.
Hmm.
It enhances the comedy. It's sort of like this frenetic energy of Martin Short, and then this you expect there to be a matching energy in return, but in fact,
Hmm.
it's like like just
Yeah.
chill out, dude, you know? And you know, and the lines that she delivers help that. So it's really, you know, I think it's a bit of a cliche for people in post to say like, well, there's a musicality to it, especially
Mhm.
in comedy. And, you know, but that's sort of how it feels to me when I'm putting it together. You know, I've watched some comedies where you can almost, you know, put your fingers over your ears and not hear the words that are saying, but you can hear the cadence in which the energy of the lines is delivered, and you can
Mhm.
feel that there's a punchline. You know, you just feel it even if you don't know what the words are. And I think that in our case, we have, you know, as you said, we have that high energy of Oliver, and we have the, you know, sort of low kind of stoic energy of Mabel, and then, you know, Charles sort of fits in the middle. He can kind of go either way and be pulled by, because he's
Mhm.
a little bit of a passive character, he can be pulled in the direction of whoever's around him. And of course, him and Martin Short have amazing chemistry, and their banter together is always great.
Do they ad lib a lot for the show, or is it more to the script?
Not too much. Not too much. It's usually the ad libs are kind of thought out during the rehearsal process or during
Mhm.
the earlier takes of what may or may not be a better line, and they're discussed. Occasionally you get some ad libs, but for the most part, yeah, they pretty much stick to the script, or, you know, or pitch something that improves it a little bit.
Probably one of the smartest things I've ever done for my career. He gave me all the tools that I needed to be able to jump into a new career.
Getting myself into a mindset, thinking like an editor, and being around people that I can talk to on that level was really invaluable to me.
A lot of the things that I learned from that class, I still think about.
I loved the classroom. I loved the computer stations. We built a sense of community.
And it also instills a lot of confidence in you to take that and go out into the world.
After I took the class, I felt very prepared to take the next step.
I owe Manhattan Workshop the career that I have right now.
Things have been going great, and I really have the Manhattan Workshop to thank for that.
Oh, I would love for them to release just the banter of the two of them talking, because just watching interviews with them, you can see they like care about each other, but they're also incredibly funny.
Yeah. Well, their whole thing of just you know, knocking each other down
Yeah.
is it's really good. And yeah, and they're fun. They seem to be having a really fun time on set.
Mhm. I guess you know, in this we keep expanding the cast, like they keep bringing in top level actors. So I'm wondering, like, you know, how do you work with all these, you know, phenomenal actors' performances, but also, you know, like give enough time to the story and the characters? Because if we're dealing with Meryl Streep and we have to have like a deep moment or something, but we also, you know, you only have 30 minutes roughly to tell the story. So how do you balance everything with so many characters?
You know, ultimately, you just try and honor the story that's being told.
Mhm.
And as great as it is to cut footage, and actually, this is one of my sore spots on this whole thing, is that I didn't get any Meryl Streep scenes. Episodes, I was like, I'm gonna go back to season 4. I didn't get any Meryl Streep scenes, which is a shame, but you know, there's always hope in the future. But all these new, you know, Eugene Levy and Zach Galifianakis, and it, it's once you sit down and cut the footage, you just feel lucky that you have great performances. But in the end, your job is to tell the jokes, tell the story, make sure the clues are being presented properly. And so I don't think about honoring an actor's performance, or sorry, honoring an actor and their presence in the show. I think about what's the story and what's the best way to tell it, and how are the characters being affected by the other characters. And so, you know, I've maintained that the reason that the show succeeds in not toppling over by having all, you know, these more and more casts, is that the core relationship between our 3 characters is so strong that they can go off like in an episode 403 and have separate adventures and sort of have to look in the mirror by seeing how other people perceive themselves. And then in the end, they come back and they kind of all have a debrief on that. And that's what holds it together, you know? So all of these people can come in, but it's still about these three characters and how they feel about each other. You know, and this season's been great in terms of the development between Oliver and Charles, and them actually saying it out loud that they care about each other. And I think that's what holds it together.
You sort of mentioned, having those meetings where the whole season sort of is mapped out for you guys, and being that it's, a mystery, it has to be thought out and precise. But how much flexibility do you guys have in post to alter certain mystery elements of the storyline?
I guess we're given a really great roadmap of what needs to happen, and that changes. They have a plan. It's like any I think project. You have a plan, and then as you're shooting it and as things are coming in, you find strengths and weaknesses, and you adjust to those, and they may have ripple effects on episodes before and after yours. So you're paying attention to all of that stuff, and then you're just trying to, my rule is always to give just the information that's needed at the time without overdoing it or underdoing it. So, as we go through and we try and do that, we have the flexibility. And in some cases, there may be a hiccup that happened in production where they didn't get quite the right shot that they needed. And this is, again, for every project, there's always some sort of a thing that has to be figured out and resolved in post. And so we figure out a way to get that information across with the footage that we have, or figure out what we need. But I would say that our job is to execute the ideas of the script to the best of our ability, and it's sort of I lost my train of thought. That's the end of my thought. That we're just there to try and execute the story that they want to tell.
Yeah.
When it's not working, present alternative options to it, or figure out ways to work around it.
What is there a particular scene or episode that has been difficult for you to edit? I'm assuming episode 6, but is there like a particular scene or something that it was challenging?
The thing about episode 6, and it was challenging, and what was challenging about it was that it was the kind of, because we hadn't done it before and it wasn't our normal thing, and we had to not only tell it in a specific style, like, as you were talking about before, like not always having the close-up that you would go to if you were shooting conventional coverage, to still tell an Only Murders in the Building episode where you were directing the audience's attention at all of these things that you want, the comedy, the jokes, the mystery, the clues, with that limited footage, and also controlling the pace of it and having it feel satisfying as if you've just watched Only Murders, but with this twist on it. So we had to kind of figure out, they did a great job in prep and in shooting it. But once it came together, there were still a lot of things to kind of iron out and figure out. And one of the things I tried to figure out was how we were going to keep the pace going, because when you shoot a scene in ostensibly just a oneer, it's like a play, right? You can't, you're watching what they do, and they're great. Almost every take was tremendous. They did a great job with it, but it's hard to do a 3 or 4 minute thing and get every beat of it and have the camera swing at the right time and do all of those things. So that's the first step, was to put in these invisible edits and take the best pieces of all the different takes and make sure that 1 3-minute scene looks like it's shot in 1 minute, but it's really 4 or 5 different pieces. And then the second thing I recognized was that audio was going to be a huge factor in helping me make it feel full, and that the pace, that there weren't any dead spots. And when I got my first Howard camera handheld scene, I cut it together, and it was good, and I put in my different invisible edits, and I put all my best pieces together, and it was good, but I was like, it's still like lacking a little something. And then I was like, wait a second, Howard's in the room with them, and he's not saying a thing, because as far as production's concerned, he's just trying to be the cameraman and get the other characters, but he'd be involved. He'd have reactions. He'd have things he'd want to chime in with. And I started to imagine all the things he could, just even grunts or, you know, things of approval, like little sounds of approval or even little lines. And once I kind of figured that out, I sent a list off and I asked Set to just give me a bunch of wild lines and a bunch of reactions and a bunch of things. And they sent that back and I just packed in as much Howard as I could. And what it did was in a lot of cases, what it was there for was to keep the energy moving, keep things full, because in comedy, you can't really have too many dead spots as a comedy like this. And so it filled up stuff. And it also had the benefit of like often adding a little bit of comedy, or, you know, later in the episode, there are moments where I'm hoping that he's telling the audience, like, this is serious. Like, this actually is a dreadful moment, a threat. And because he's reacting with dread and he's normally, you know, cracking jokes. So, so that was a really big part of solving the pace of it. Your question was about, you know, difficult scenes. So that was a difficult part of that. I guess the opposite version of that is the scene in episode 403 where it's Eugene Levy and Charles and Richard Kind trying to get him to put the eye drops in. You know, I saw the dailies on that and I was just like, oh no, this is like the greatest scene I've ever seen. And I just wanted to make it the best version of itself. And so that was a really fun scene to put together and not too challenging.
I have one last question for you. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
Golly. That's a good, you know, okay, so I got interviewed by you guys for another show one time and I gave an answer. Now it's popping into my head. A guilty pleasure. The last thing I've just been watching is Detroiters, which I love Tim Robinson and Sam Richardson, and it's really funny. I don't know if it's a guilty pleasure. It's just a pleasure. I would think of something that was a guilty pleasure, but yeah, Detroiters is really good. It's on Netflix now, so if you haven't, check it out. It's really fun.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com or, of course, on Instagram at filmmakers_you. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.